Hi, everybody. My name is Rosette, and I am a second year sociology student at Goldsmiths, and I'm going on my third year this autumn.
And I'm Poppy, and I'm also just finished my second year of sociology at Goldsmiths, and I'm going into my third year.
So, over the last 2 academic years in Goldsmiths, there was 2 different rounds of strikes, and as students, we have heard a lot about the experience of the effect on the student body, and about the lack of clarity and sometimes even frustration around why the strikes continued across the 2 semesters. So by the help of our lovely lecturer Yasmin, we were able to connect with 2 academic staff members from Goldsmiths who agreed to shed some light on the events. So for people who don't know you, could you both just tell a little about your role at Goldsmiths and how long you've been working in higher education? So if we start with Svenja.
Okay, hi, my name is Svenja Bromberg. I'm a lecturer in the sociology department, and I have been for the last 3 years a full-time member of the department, although I've been in the department at Goldsmiths for quite a while. I came initially in 2010 to Goldsmiths and to London to do my MA in critical and creative analysis, and I went on to do a PhD, then taught briefly in a different university in London, in North London, and then returned to Goldsmiths as initially an hourly paid lecturer, so an AL, and then on to kind of a full-time contract. So yeah, I've been around a while. I teach social theory, philosophy, and Marxism. Those are kind of my areas.
Thank you, Svenja. And Kieran?
Yes, so I'm Kieran Greywall. I'm a reader in the department, and I joined 3 years ago. I moved across the world from Australia, and I have been in academia quite a long time now. I think I got my first I started tutoring in about 2006, in 2008. Oh, sorry, and I convened the MA in Human Rights. Sorry, so yeah, I should tell you what I actually do. So I don't encounter many undergraduates at the moment. I'm just going to be, as of next year, doing an undergraduate module, options module again, but usually I do the Masters of Human Rights program in the department.
So I think it's safe to say that it's been a fairly turbulent year at Goldsmiths. So as Rosetta said, prior to the lockdown, we had a round of strikes before Christmas, and then we had another set again in February and March. And then I think just before that, we had the controversy with the closure of like the uni's gym, and then the proposal of the Enterprise Hub, which I think very few students and probably staff know much about, and I don't think it has had much involvement with staff and students. But I think with the strikes, we often hear that tutors and lecturers are taking industrial action, but we don't really get to hear much about the circumstances. So we would just like to know if you could explain to us a bit about why staff went on strike recently, just to give students a better understanding.
Well, maybe I can start. Maybe Svenja can give you a little bit more of a kind of overview, but I mean, I can just tell you personally why I went on strike. And to be perfectly honest, it was because I was exhausted and fed up. And so, as I said, I've been working in higher education for quite a long time now. I've come from Australia, where certainly the universities I worked were incredibly neoliberal. And so, we were kind of getting used to this idea that, more and more bureaucracy and management, less and less space for academics. And I came here thinking, I really wanted to work at Goldsmiths. I mean, like I said, I packed up my life to move here. I did to meet the students. I was excited to be teaching what I care about and doing the research I care about. And it's just been grueling, to be perfectly honest. the pressures on us are really intense. We feel like we're not satisfying anybody. You know, the reality is I can feel that as a teacher, I was a better teacher a few years ago than I am now. And that's frustrating. I feel like I let the students down because I don't have the time and energy for them anymore. I don't feel satisfied myself. And so I think the kind of overriding sense for many of us was much of the joy of what we do has disappeared. And also, just to put that into perspective, because some people will say, oh, well, you know, academics, you're overprivileged and, you know, like, why would you expect joy? So I switched careers I was a corporate lawyer. And so I worked really long hours, but I had amazing working conditions. I earned loads of money. I drank cocktails at the harbour. You know, it was a great life, but it wasn't satisfying. I gave up all of that because I actually thought I wanted to do something that mattered and that I cared about. Now I feel like my working conditions are crappy. My workload is as high as the corporate lawyer, but without any of the benefits, without any of the kind of pleasures of why I would do this work. And as a result, I think that does reflect on how much we're able to give to our students as well. Sorry, Svenja, your turn.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, yeah, you kind of spoke very directly to the experiences. I mean, I guess the broad context of why we went on strike initially was all around pensions, right? And I don't know if maybe everyone is a bit tired of hearing about these contexts, but I guess in 2018, so the first round of strikes in the spring 2018, I remember quite distinctly kind of going on this march through London in the snowstorm. That was really all about kind of a huge onslaught on pensions in the higher education sector, which would have meant, for example, for a lecturer like me to be cut £10,000 each year of the pension, the pensions we could expect later on. So a huge pay cut in a way, framed around the idea of a deficit. So the whole argument was there is this massive hole in the pot and someone needs to help close it, and that was all to fall mainly on the academic staff, on the people who rather than the employers, because pensions always exist out of the contributions by the employees and the employers on the other side. And the whole reason we went on strike was that the unions did an evaluation and found that there was actually no such deficit. And so there was this struggle in a way over two dimensions of the pension scheme. On the one hand, a kind of change of how pensions would work and a higher risk. Basically, we were suggested to be given a higher risk pension that would depend on financial markets, how much it would pay out later on. And on the other hand, kind of this idea of the deficit, which from kind of like union evaluations wasn't actually there as the people who run the pension scheme basically claimed. So we went on strike, and the achievement of the strike, everyone after that moment of strike, and I don't know how that kind of resonates with the student body, but we actually were thought that the strike initially had been successful because the employers agreed to having set up this joint negotiating committee, which would reevaluate the terms, which would reevaluate the deficit and think once again, is it really necessary to restructure the pension scheme in this way? So we were all happy. We thought, well, that's kind of a good sign. And then over the summer, this committee did lots of work and found, in fact, that we were right, that the unions and the people who went on strike were right, that the deficit wasn't a problem in the scale that the pension scheme managers had argued. So that was kind of, and then after the summer, we all came back to university and we got this information telling us, well, yes, the committee found that you were right all along, but nevertheless, we will go ahead with the restructure of the pension scheme. And you will still have an increased contributions, you will still lose out on how much your pension will pay out later on. And so everything had disappeared, and it all had disappeared behind closed doors in a way, you know, by people kind of negotiating over our future and the kind of in a way our how much we are essentially paid for the work we are doing, which has not been changing at all. And yeah, and so the only way, so what do you do when that happens? And I guess that comes back to, you know, thinking about what is the power of university employees? And it's a very difficult question. And I think that the reason we are here today and we are discussing this is that it's not so straightforward. I mean, yes, we went again on strike. We went again on strike over the same pension issue because it had not been resolved. We added, so the recent 2 bouts of strike in this academic year also included a fight over 4 additional issues, namely pay, equality, casualization, and workload. Lots of things that Kieran already touched on. So yeah, so the fight kind of continued and it grew because as I think we know now very much at Goldsmiths, as we are discussing GTTs, AL, so hourly paid staff that are very important for teaching students on a one-to-one basis, seminars and so on. We are in a fight over are their contracts going to be renewed next year or not. So we know very much about casualization, how that links in with gender, with race and ethnicity. So those issues were already part of why we went on strike again in the autumn and in the spring of 2019-2020. And I think in the end, it comes back to, I think, Kieran, you started with the neoliberalization of the university. I mean, in the end, it comes down to the higher education sector is in crisis, and it has been since, and I remember in 2010, when I first arrived at Goldsmiths, we went on these huge student protests around the introduction of student fees. And I think that whole restructuring of our university, of what it means to study in a university, paying so much money for it, but also teach in a university where, you know, the ultimate kind of the way the business model succeeds is only by, you know, making money from tuition fees, essentially, is the way that universities today either thrive or they struggle if they cannot attract enough students, if they cannot make this kind of business model work. And so I think, yeah, all rounds of strike were in a way a manifestation of this kind of how this crisis of our higher education sector moves around different issues, and we haven't resolved those issues. And so maybe one question that for me is very much the outcome of this strike personally, because I think the last round of strike and then how it moved into the pandemic and how, you know, was very unsatisfactory. I mean, you know, it's very unclear what did we achieve by going on strike. We are in a deeper crisis right now. Our university is, all universities are across the UK than before. So it's not at all clear what it achieved. But I would still say, you know, the strike is a manifestation, or it's kind of our attempt to say to our employers, look, something is not working. And I think students are saying the same thing from the other side of the coin, something is not working. Ideally, the strike would be a moment where we can all come together and formulate together maybe alternatives. And I think in the last strike, we tried that a little bit. We had these working groups around kind of envisioning an alternative Goldsmiths. There was this initiative of the Gold Paper. So I think strikes are always a moment where that is a possibility, but I think it's tricky because I think because we are not in a factory, you know, because us going on strike means not just machines stop and employers lose lots of money. That's not how it works in the university. For us, it's like we have a bond with the students, and that is also disrupted in the moment when lecturers decide to go on strike. So I think that creates this kind of challenge. How can we use a moment of a strike, or now I think a moment of a pandemic, to maybe work together to re-envision how this university can work for everyone who has a big stake in it, I guess. Sorry, that was really long.
Oh, that was great. Thank you. I think it was really enlightening. And also, I really appreciate you both, that there is the passion and also the individual experience, because I think it's very important for students here, the experience for you guys as well. And the disruption of the strikes was obviously clear for both students and staff, and that was exacerbated by the current ongoing pandemic, which has been very challenging. And as you kind of, Svenja, started to touch upon that as we are all kind of trying to adjust and envision how the university life will be changing as a result of the pandemic, do you think that to move to teaching online can open any opportunities, particularly under sociological departments? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Okay, so at the moment, I think many of us are probably just feeling very anxious about what it's going to mean, because obviously, we're trying to imagine what it would look like, and it's requiring a lot of imagination, and at a point where everybody's just really tired. That seems to be my resounding theme. It's just everybody's tired. But I do, and I think that issue of how we're going to create the bond with students, how we're going to kind of facilitate any sort of sense of community, I think is something that we're all talking a lot about. So there have been, various both formal and informal gatherings of people around the department, getting together, talking about, okay, what are we going to try? How are we going to experiment with different methods? How are we going to resolve some of the issues around inequality that this obviously throws up? Because on the one hand, it seems like, yay, this should be more accessible. Now we can do all these things online. On the other hand, Yasmin just messaged me before that my internet connection is not that good. So, we've got internet connection issues. We know people don't necessarily have quiet places to work. We know that people are managing with mobile phones, so all of that stuff we're trying to grapple with. So I think there's a lot of sense of anxiety around it. But I do think that there's actually some really exciting possibilities. And I think, like, for me particularly, one of the things that that I actually tried just before the lockdown, the last classes we had. So a lot of my research is in Sri Lanka, and I do a lot of work with activist groups, feminist, particularly feminist collectives, in quite rural parts of the country. And a lot of what we do is actually, we sit and we talk about ideas. Like, a lot of them, they haven't had a lot of access to formal education. They're really smart, they're really engaged. And what they get from talking to me is they basically quiz me on all these theories that they've heard about but don't know anything about. And I have to do this kind of, okay, how am I going to teach this in a simple way across a language? But what I ended up doing, I was teaching a master's course on, it's called Gender Culture Rights. And we were talking about, how do you think about solidarity, transnational solidarity, in such global inequality? How do you think about a sisterhood when there's so much that separates? There's so many critiques of this sort of simple idea of sisterhood. And so I thought, well, rather than us just having that conversation, now that we're doing it on Zoom, why don't some of the women that I work with over there join? And so, the ones who do speak English did. And so we had this great conversation where, the students from the class here and a couple of the young women from over there had this discussion about what it means to talk about solidarity. So, that kind of, the fact that we can actually reach out to people in other places, I think is really exciting. And then I think the other thing that is really exciting, which is also connected with the kind of the student experience, which I think, for many of us as academics, we're trying to work through. Svenja's, younger generation, so she's probably already cooler on this. But, for us old farts, learning to shift the kind of relationship in the classroom, where, you know, it's not just that we come and we impart wisdom, we lecture you for 2 hours and, you know, you go away absorbing all of our wisdom. That, you know, I think many of us have been trying to challenge that anyway in our classroom setting. And now we know, I mean, I know full well, having tried to sit through seminars, I am a terrible student. I keep logging on to these webinars, and then because the video's not on, you know, I get distracted, you know, a message pops up, you know, WhatsApping. So I'm just getting a little glimpse of what people will be doing while I'm imparting my wisdom for 2 hours in a lecture. So, and at least in a classroom, I can see you do it. I can't see it now. So, which is actually really great, because it does make us think, okay, how are we going to engage people? Like, there are things that we want to share with you, but us lecturing you is not the only way in which that can be done. Let's shift this balance. Let's actually think about how we would do this differently. How are we going to engage with you differently? Good, there are cheers. And so I think that is an opportunity. Okay, you're looking very excited, Zeta.
I love it. I love it. And Svenja, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, no, that sounds good, Kieran. Yeah, and I mean, genuinely, I think, as you say, I think one positive thing that is coming from this, and we've heard it now a few times, is where we have meetings and we say, well, for many years we've thought that this doesn't work, and now is the moment that it actually doesn't work, and so we have to, you know, confront, for example, like thinking about the lecture seminar separation, you know, what does it do, what purpose does it serve, and so on. So I think I absolutely agree. I think the challenges that online teaching presents is, on one level, at least it forces us to maybe get some very much sedimented structures around which we organize our learning and teaching kind of up in the air, and think again. I'm also a bit worried, genuinely worried. I mean, for me, what is most enjoyable, I think, about teaching is this kind of sociality of the classroom, right? Kind of to be there together, and even if it's just a lecture, even if, you know, it's me talking a long time, it still feels like it still feels very different. And I experienced that when suddenly everything moved online, very suddenly. There is still something, you get a sense of the room, you can interact in certain ways, you exchange, you know, kind of, you get a sense of whether people are disagreeing fundamentally or confused by what you say, and that, to do that online, I think, and to think about also asynchronous ways of learning. I mean, we all, you know, listen to podcasts, we all watch videos of people giving talks all over the world, but what, you know, how do we still maintain that teaching is something a bit different from all of those things that we already do, and how do we create this kind of sense of being a group and having stakes together in what we learn? That I find genuinely challenging, and I'm not yet sure how are we going to resolve that. And I think that will, you know, probably take a little bit of working out, and also hopefully getting lots of feedback from students around what works, what doesn't work, and so on. Because the other thing I think is, and we have this already in the seminars, you know, the seminar is in some ways, it easily gets a very pressured space where everyone feels like, now we are on the spot, we have this text that's extremely complicated, you know, what are we supposed to do with it? Looking at each other online doesn't necessarily improve that, right? Because it's almost, you know, everyone is in focus. So, yeah, I think it does create kind of challenges that we need to work through. I think the other thought I had on this kind of, what does it mean to do sociology or to do theory in lockdown? I think I always thought as academics, we are really, and I think students as well, quite well prepared for lives that are quite you know, that have unusual rhythms in the sense, you know, that we don't have a 9-to-5 job. You know, as students, I think also you are juggling many things, but I still, for me at least, experiencing lockdown, being at home all the time, still creates a different sense of rhythm and of time. And I think there is a challenge there to maybe say, I think it can be a great space for returning to some very like fundamentals. Let's just read a text together for a few weeks. And I had some very nice experiences of reading groups where that worked really well. But I think with kind of this endless experience of time, I think there is also a challenge that we need to kind of break that time up and make some commitments and find ways to kind of to commit to each other and to commit to doing certain tasks in maybe a bit more of an organized way, because otherwise there are just lots of ideas and lots of texts and lots of podcasts that you know, we can jump around in. So yeah, that for me is still an ongoing challenge, I guess, to create that those kinds of priorities and how we translate that into a term or 2 terms or something like that.
Can I just add something? I was just thinking when you were talking about, you know, the kind of energy in the classroom, because one of the things we were doing also, because, you know, on top of pandemic and on top of, you know, all of the kind of tensions around the neoliberalizing of the university, and then we also have, of course, all the Black Lives Matter stuff that has really kind of erupted in, you know, in very positive ways in terms of making us think very hard about not about all our institutions, but, you know, higher education's role in racial inequality. And so we, you know, a group of us in the department started reading some Bell Hooks, who I don't know if you guys have encountered before, but, you know, some of her stuff around, you know, what it means to teach, you know, and to teach in a kind of emancipatory political way. And so we were reading this bit about bodies in class, you know, bodies in the classroom. And then suddenly we were like, okay, well, what does it mean? Okay, now there aren't bodies in a classroom. So we were trying to think through, okay, well, okay, so that's bad in some ways, but then, you know, maybe it's good in others, in the sense that actually we know that the classroom is also a very power-laden space that operates in ways that can be quite exclusionary. The challenge is, will we be able to find ways in the online that might help us reduce some of that and address some of that? And then I suppose, you know, the last thing, like if you're kind of thinking about, you know, the kind of disconnect that maybe you felt between us as staff and like our personal experiences and reasons for, you know, going on strike. You know, I do classes and my child's head appears on the side of, you know, I was doing a class and she made herself into a robot and appeared to do like a little robot dance. So, I mean, you know, the kind of divides between our personal and private, you know, private spaces and our kind of public personas are less, which is challenging and worrying in lots of ways. But, you know, maybe it also helps in kind of humanizing us as well, that, you know, there's a bit more of a sense, because, I mean, you know, that's, I suppose, to be the kind of, after being really like, yay, this is great, you know, the kind of the negative side, if you pick up on many of the things we went on strike about, you know, for those of us who are single parents, for those of us who are, you know, carers in other ways, for many women, unfortunately, you know, the pandemic is just exacerbating a lot of the pressures, you know, that we were already struggling with. So, you know, so I think there is a lot of anxiety around that. But if there are ways in which we can think about how we're going to create new forms of community that maybe don't hold on to these very rigid divides, and, you know, as Bell Hooks is talking about, you know, the kind of dictator lecturer who's like, you know, the person who like imparts, maybe it actually a bit more vulnerability and a bit more sharing of how we're all struggling through this. Maybe that will help us think about other forms of community and other ways in which we could structure the learning experience and the university space that maybe weren't necessarily open to us when we were sort of in the more standard spaces. That's my little positive end.
Yeah, no, thank you for your responses. I think, yeah, what you said about vulnerability, I feel like that could be a really nice way of maybe exploring a very different relationship between staff and students. But is there anything else that you feel needs to be added to the conversation, or is there anything that anyone is burning to say?
I think we've rabbited a lot already.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think you
for us to talk. I mean, that's what we like to do best.
I think you both gave a lot of really good insight and also a lot of food for thought to think ahead and kind of, I don't want to use a buzzword, but kind of innovate that how can this kind of challenge that all of us are experiencing can provide something kind of nurturous, if that is a word, of like how can this maybe rupture something that already has been existing and kind of rewrite how we work together.
Can I just take a liberty and ask you two, what do you think? What do you think about, what are your expectations going into third year? I mean, what are your anxieties and what are your hopes?
So I can begin. I think the initial worry was about being only on the online platform. I've been lucky to be working in a space where we've been only working online, and we've also had to transform a community service evening that we are supporting people into online for a lot of people who don't have normally access to kind of smart devices, etc. So there's been a lot of challenges, but there's been so many freedoms on the way and so many kind of positive aspects. So from my personal point of view, I have hope in my heart of that, even though this is the third year and I know that I need a lot of support with the dissertation, etc. I feel like, maybe there is something that can grow from this very, very challenging time. So there is hope. There is hope for sure for me. And for Poppy?
I think the dissertation has definitely been on my mind. Just thinking about, like, obviously sociology, doing a research-based dissertation, and like how that's going to affect, the ways that we carry out research, because obviously I know that you can do an interview over the phone, but it's not quite the same as really like immersing yourself in the situation or the context that you're actually trying to like understand. But I think, I don't know, after hearing what both of you have said about, maybe like challenging and rewriting the relationship between lecturers and staff, and that maybe we should all be on a bit more of like a level playing field instead of having a lecturer who's more of a dictator. Not that I've had any lecturers at Goldsmiths that are like that. But no, I just, I think kind of the same as Rosetta, that there is some kind of hope that maybe this could be different, and maybe it could be quite a nice catalyst for some actual change, because I feel like people have had to really adapt to working in a new environment, and we've all sort of been forced into a situation that like is very unusual and strange, and we've not really been here before. But yeah, I think it's going to be very interesting just to see how third year goes, and I do feel very sorry for like first years coming into education. But I think I just definitely missed, like, when the process of like walking into uni and like sitting down and doing a lecture and talk, like we were talking about obviously the atmosphere, and that's all very different now. We don't really get a feel for the atmosphere, or you can't put up your hand and ask a question in the same way. I mean, you can on a Zoom, but it's not really quite the same thing. But yeah, I think we should end on a hopeful note. I'm sure it will be all fine. And I mean, I think if anyone had told us how 2020 was going to go, especially for higher education, you probably would think that, well, I don't know. I don't think you'd even believe what anyone was going to tell you about 2020. But, we've all adapted to that. So I'm sure we can adapt again. Yeah.
So thank you, everybody, for taking the time, and let the conversation continue.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much for organizing this.